Hi, this is Chris at Clever Unicorn Games and the Unicorn Collective, back with another interview. Today I have designer and developer Glenn Ford with me. How are you doing today, Glenn?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Tell me, when you are not designing, developing, making, or even playing games, what is it you like to do with your spare time?
I like to go around English heritage locations. We're in the southeast of Kent, unsurprisingly from the business name. So we've got the town I live in has 3 castles, and we're walking around the White Cliffs of Dover and going out into the forest and the fields nearby. Um, General sort of hobbyist. My wife knits and sells knitted bits and pieces, so occasionally we sort of go and run a market stall at a craft fair just for the fun of selling random bits and pieces rather than filling the house with them. So I suppose that takes up a certain amount of time.
What is your favorite board game?
I suppose that's one of those ones that always sort of shifts from day to day. The game that I most often quote when I'm asked that question is a little game called Ravens of Three History, which is a 2-player cooperative game, asymmetrical and limited communication. One of you is searching through the memories of the other person in order to pull out memories to rebuild their lost childhood. So one person lays down cards into a tableau, and the other person has to pull out the cards that they need in order to form what they call it a poem, but a series of sets of cards that they know that they need and the other person doesn't. And it's a tiny, I think it's less than 10 quid to buy from Osprey Games, although they have just re-released it in a much big, I don't know, I'm going to say unnecessarily bigger, but a much bigger package, which is a bit more expensive. And what I love about that game is when you first pick it up and start playing, and you really have to play it with it has a little legacy element where it adds in harder and harder rules as it goes along. And I really would recommend playing it with the same person, because on the first game when you play it, it feels like the person laying out the tableau has all the power. They're the proactive player. They build the network, and the other person is quite passively pulling cards out. As you learn the way each of you plays, because it's a silent game and you've got to figure out what the other person needs to give it to them, you realize that the person doing the choosing has all of the power, because the other person is just servicing them and learning what they need and when they need it. And it's, without ever making explicit, it's a really beautiful, just a sense of feeling the power with the same set of mechanics change as you understand the actual relationship that you have in the game. So yeah, that's one that I often quote as being something that I really love, as mainly because it's a quite obscure one, because I love Pandemic Legacy Season 1. What's the point in recommending that to people? It's like, if you're listening to me, you already know about Pandemic Legacy Season 1. Thank you very much.
When you have an idea in your head, so you've got an idea in your head for a game, where do you go first from that idea? Where do you take your next steps?
So step one is there's a list, an actual paper list in a folder I have, where I try and put the game down in 1 or 2 sentences in a way that it'll mean something to me later on. Generally, it's the core concept of whether it's the theme or the central mechanic. I try to make a guess at whether I think it would be a tabletop skirmish game or a board game, because a lot of the time figuring out which of those 2 a concept actually is ends up sort of being quite a bit of the development process for me. And then usually that folder, it sits in that form in that folder for a little while. And then every now and again, when I'm trying to figure out what the next game is going to be, I go through that folder, I cross off the ones that were garbage ideas or that don't mean anything to me anymore. I pick like usually 3 or 4 to write up into a page of reasonable mechanics. and then I pull about 3 of them out and try and build them into a prototype. And then when it comes time to do the next game, I pick one of those prototypes to try and push through to development. So.
Yeah. You've taken a couple of games now through from your head all the way to the backers or the gamers if it's been through helping develop something like Gaslands. In those processes or in that timeline, have you ever hit a barrier or a hurdle which has just stopped you completely, and you have had to really think about how you would get past it, and then how did you overcome it?
So I mean, I think relatively speaking, I think I'm fairly lucky so far in that a lot of the really problematic barriers, I seem to have the knack for identifying them relatively early on, and figuring out how they're going to work before too much effort is put in. So, for example, Moonflight, the second game that I backed on, that I put up on Kickstarter, it's a deck unbuilding game, and that was it came from the central concept of playing games like Dominion and loving them, and obviously Dominion is genius. And then at the end of the game, having to go for an entire deck of cards to figure out what your score was, and it's not too bad in Dominion. But there are some like Cryptozoic's deck building set of games, Cerberus, where the number of points can be like up to 6 or 7 points. It's written right on the bottom of the card in quite small numbers, and counting up those points takes a while. And then if you're within 1 or 2 points of the other person, you've got to do a recount, just to make
sure.
absolutely damn certain that you've narrowly pipped the loss. And I wanted to have a deck building game where at the end of the game you've got a hand of cards, and that's what you score rather than having a deck. And the obvious way of doing that was to have a full deck of cards and then have a part of the game which is about trashing and filtering and all those parts of a deck builder that people enjoy. And then whoever gets down to a single hand first ends the game. And then if you catch the other person with garbage from their deck still in their hand, you outscore them. So you get to do this little efficient, unbuilding thing. But I didn't want to just give people a preset deck to take apart, partly because that has been done, and partly because it's just not as much fun to be handed a thing going, this is what we reckon you should use, crack on with that. Oh, and by the way, learn 30 cards and how they operate. It's not a particularly pleasant experience. And before I could start writing Moonflight, I had to figure out how to go from a period where people get to build a deck from like 10 random cards and then break it back down again, and how to pace that. It ended up being a fairly simple thing, that there's a break point when the markets end, and then all the cards spin and unlock the trashing ability from the deck building ability. But it wasn't. The game couldn't happen until I had figured out that. And I was on a walk in the woods when this thing formed of where you have the cards to do 2 things, and you have a set trigger when they switch from one to the other, and that lets you give people both the building and the unbuilding. And once that was in place, it was like, okay, that everything runs from there. I think the one that's been that there was a late barrier that ended up being a real problem was the game that's coming out next February from Osprey Games, A Billion Suns. We always want to make our games multiplayer, sort of as an option. And Billion Suns wasn't working as a multiplayer game just at all. And then we cracked into the idea of letting you play on more than one tabletop. So Billion Suns is a deep space sort of fleet battle game. Deep space spaceships can jump from one star system to another. So one table is Alpha Centauri, the other table is Betelgeuse, and there's different things on different tables. And at that point, you can have one player sort of committing on one table, one player committing on a different table, and it saved you because what you were getting with 3 players was a piggy in the middle situation, where one person went with a heavy fleet and one person went with a light fleet, and the guy who was in the middle just got undercut by one side and crushed by the other and could never win. And once you had multiple tables, that didn't happen anymore because you weren't piggy in the middle. You were overbidding on that table, undercutting on that table, and not bothering to commit on the third table. But the issue that we never actually fixed in A Billion Suns, instead we dropped it out, was letting people score by destroying other people's ships. Because that was in there for a long time. Always just meant that a heavy fleet was always the stronger option, unless you went really razor thin with a really tiny recon fleet and just sort of slid in and got out. And that ended up being unfun. Because one guy drops an entire fleet of like dreadnoughts on the table. One guy runs in a recon ship, picks up 2 points, and then pisses off again. And then you got 3 turns of the guy with dreadnoughts going,
okay,
right, brilliant. I'm glad I brought those along today. And so that was one that we kept running up against, and we kept trying different solutions to do with the amount of points you gained or you lost, or how you invested them and how you got them back. And eventually it was just like, this is making the game less fun and less original and less interesting. I don't know why we're fighting so hard for it. So it just went, and now you don't get points for destroying other ships, and it doesn't matter. The game's better for it. It didn't need it. Hopefully we will do an expansion later on that will be like a Warzone version of A Billion Suns that will reward you for destroying other ships. But it needs it to make that work. It needed too many tight controls that made all the other really, really cool things about the game stop working. So it's like, if doing this thing is going to break all the other bits of the game, let's just cut it out and move on from it.
Have you ever played a game that you didn't like? You don't have to name it, but what was the theme or the mechanic, or what is it that put you off that game?
It's hard to make me really dislike a game. I'll play anything, and I'll play almost anything twice. The thing that persistently gets to me, and this is one of the things that one of my regular gaming groups shouts at me a lot, is that the game lied to me. When it's without naming names, it comes up quite often in a Euro game where the game says, "This is the theme. You're meant to be doing things and assuming that things work in the way that things within this theme work." And then you operate the game and something works completely not in the way that they would do according to the theme. For example, if there's a game where like you build a factory and the factory gives you a reward on the day you build it and then just sits there dead for the rest of the game. It's like, but no, you told me that I was building a set of factories, and the way that you build factories is you build it and then it continues to give you stuff. It doesn't work on the day you open it, and then you may as well burn it to the ground. That's and it's whenever I play a game, because going, okay, I heard the theme and I hear the rules, but I hear the theme and I assume that things will click together the way the theme says. And then I play it and it just doesn't. And that game lied to me with its theme. It tricked me into playing a certain way by going, oh, it'll be like this. Oh, it's just not. Have you ever in your life... it's like Azul is a great game, but why you throw any tile you're not using onto the floor in a fit of pique and smash it to pieces? No, this is a beautiful, expensive tile. I'll put it on the shelf and use it later. No, it is not currently useful. Smash! Why? Who operates in that way? That is the thing. I any theme and any mechanic, when the theme makes me do something where I would have to be out of my mind to do it in real life. I was like, well, I wasn't expecting that to happen. Why would the delivery man turn up to my zoo with a completely random set of animals? Like I go, oh, it's all right, Gav, you can just shove them all in the barn. Yeah, that's how zoos operate. Mentioning no specific names.
No, I think I figured out which one you're talking about, and I'm going to ask you at the end of this when we stop recording. I think I know what it is, but What are you doing right now? What are you working on? What is it that you've already mentioned Billion Suns. What else? Anything else?
Well, we've just literally sort of 3 days ago, I think now, finished Kickstarter for SSO Rage of Montalbano, which is a sort of a deluxe expansion to our first ever Kickstarter SSO. So at the moment I'm working on sorting out the CrowdOx survey, pardon me, which is going to launch tomorrow. Setting the last few bits and pieces with the graphic designer, setting that up with the printer to get the print sample through, figuring out logistics and all of the thrilling parts of a immediately post Kickstarter, as sort of saying, you go for a lot of time where your game is your baby and it's you beaving away, and then you show it to a few select people and figure it out, and then there's this thrilling thing where you put on Kickstarter and hundreds of people come in and go, this is brilliant and I will give you money for it, and then you've got sort of, you know, a minimum of like 4 or 5 months of very little activity, but all of it is other people messing with your baby far away, and it's slow and tense and sort of, so we're just I find this the weirdest bit, the bit of sort of total silence as the last few tweaks get worked out before they get sent off.
Another part obviously is the part where you the people that have paid you decide to ignore the surveys. So there's that part as well.
I mean, generally, I think of, you know, knock on wood, I've had a fairly good, well, because this is the first time I've used a pledge manager. Knock on wood, I've had fairly good response rate. There's always the one or two people. It's like on the last project, somebody backed for like one of the higher levels and never filled out their survey. And you do wonder, it's like you dropped like 50 quid on that.
Yeah.
And obviously you don't know what's going on. For all I know, that person has, you know, moved to Albania and, you know, burnt their computer at the stake or something. But it is a bit like, you know, I worry about those people, and I want to, if they, because you do hear things like, you know, like sometimes you hear people pop up and say, oh, a backer came back after 4 years and expected their game and felt like it was my fault they hadn't gotten it.
Yeah.
And that I would want to give them their game even if they turn up in 6-10 years time, but I'm not going to do a full print run for them. And there's always that little bit of tension of where have you gone? Why haven't you filled it out?
I have 22 still outstanding from a game 16 months ago.
I think I've got like 3 or 4 still from one of the weird ones. The thing is, I think there are sometimes backers who don't understand that because they gave their address to Kickstarter, it doesn't automatically mean that you as a creator has their address. Because I have had people who have popped up and been like, well, why haven't I got my game? And it's like, well, you haven't filled out your survey, so I have no idea where to send it. And they're like, no, I told somebody involved with the whole operation my address, so you're part of those. Ask that guy. And it's a bit like, you know, for obvious reasons, they don't just dole out your address to creators. There's a good reason for it, but sometimes it's not 100% clear for that. So I fear there's somebody somewhere like cursing my name because they never got there. It's like what the hell. So there's that. I'm developing what will hopefully be a project for, I'm hoping around April next year, which is a thing called Song of Tales, which is a collaborative competitive storytelling game. So basically you take the role of a character from World Folk Tales. You've got to sort of put together a series of snatches of cards, and then you literally tell a story that's going to join those cards together into one long, sort of reasonably understandable tale. When you come to your cards, you've got to tell them within the style of your particular tradition. And then other people can offer to add cards in to contribute to your tale. If you accept it, you both get points, and then so they can add to your story. Because there's a lot of games where you do storytelling, and the way that you win is to steal the story off of somebody else. And it always feels quite sad where you're enjoying the other guy's story. It's a cool story. It's interesting. You kind of want to see where it goes.
Yeah.
But to win, you've got to cut him off. And I understand that that's attractive because it's breaking the rules of normal life. You're allowed to interrupt, and that's exciting. But sometimes it's like, no, I don't want to interrupt your story. It's a great story. I'll tell you what, instead, I'll add in an extra character or two. We'll both gain points by my doing it, and then I'll give the story back to you, and we can still see it pan out. And so that's to try and give that storytelling experience, let people play all the way through a story that they're enjoying, but also make it a competitive game with sort of hard scoring mechanics where it makes sense that you want to contribute, you want to be the guy that he picks to add into his story. He'll want to pick you because it benefits both of you, and you all get to build sort of a multi-arm story at the same time. So figuring that out, fun, working on extra content for Gaslands, which we're sort of perpetually working on an extra bit of content for Gaslands. It was originally time extended. It's now Blaster magazine, which comes out I think quarterly at the moment. So Mike's decided to do something fairly big for the next edition of Blaster. So figuring that out, and then figuring out the thing that will be after it and the thing that will be after that. Fiddling around a little bit around the edges of the game that me and Mike are talking about, the skirmish game we're talking about launching on Kickstarter next year, Perilous Tales, a solo-led skirmish game. And I'm always fiddling around with putting out free print and plays for ideas that can't make it into a full game, because there's always that point where you go, this is a perfectly good game, but I can't justify the components necessary to get people to pay money for it.
Yeah.
So I'll just make it, here's a 2-page thing.
Yeah.
This works perfectly well. You don't want me to make it into a full game, trust me. And just, pop it up on the website. Sometimes, I charge a couple of quid for them if they're slightly bigger, or I've actually put them through a few rounds of playtesting. But if it's just, here's an idea, this might work, have fun with it if you like, then it just goes up on the website for free, because it's like if I bother playtesting it properly and going, yeah, I'm pretty certain that this is good, you'll have to pay like 50p for it. But if it's just, I think this will work, I can't justify making it to a game.
Yep.
Enjoy if you enjoy, then it gets stuck up as a free print and play or game.
What would be one piece of advice you would give to somebody with an idea of a game that wants to get into the industry?
I think be generous with your time. I think it is, if you've got no sort of leg up into the industry, if you're not part of it on any level, offer your time to other people. The game designers are desperate for playtesters, hungry for people who are going to read over a rule book, for proofreaders. You have that time, you'll get better, they'll appreciate it, you'll make connections. Drop into, there's literally entire forums on Board Game Geek of people begging for playtesting feedback on their games. Spend a little while giving your time freely to other people, and you'll learn from that, you'll get better. I think that would be a piece of advice of how to get into the first crack of getting into the industry.
That is,
I think
it's good advice. I mean, there's as well now, Monday and Thursday night through Discord, there's a virtual playtesting group run by a couple of guys I know, a couple of designers I know. That's really taking off now. I mean, they've got now a Euro and a US time zone slot on both of those nights, and they've got I've seen sometimes like 20 people on there all playtesting each other's games, giving critique and stuff, and I hear nothing but glowing reports from it. And I've jumped on and helped as well sometimes. It's great to go on there and find some of these little gems that people have. Because what I say is that the only thing that like separates, somebody that hasn't been published from somebody that has been published, a lot of the time can be luck and opportunity. Having the luck and opportunity to speak to the right people that will help them get a game published. So I've played games from designers that have never been published and have probably been designing games for 20 years who've just not had the look, but I've played games that they've got in prototype and they've been brilliant and probably better than 90% of games out there, and that's what I like, going to these little playtesting sessions and finding, little gems that people have created. So there's always opportunity for you to get involved.
And I think that a lot of that, what feels like luck there is the more connections you make, with people in the hobby and people in the industry, the more rolls of the dice you get on that particular piece of luck. It's like if you chat to 50 or 100 designers, odds of one of them getting published and then being a connection to a publishing company for you obviously goes up. If you sit there on your own and just pitch to publishers on your own, you're one connection that you're hoping will be successful. If you help out 100 people, you've got 100 people where if they do get successful, it's not like you're going to be able to go, hey, I worked on that game that you published, now you will publish my game. But it will give you that little lead through into a publisher, or it will at least give you, a connection with something, a manufacturer, an artist, a graphic designer, somebody who's working in the field. And finding those connections are, whether you're looking to get published or you're looking to self-publish, hunting down graphic designers that have worked in the tabletop sphere already is a surprisingly tricky thing to have to do, especially a freelance one. So if you see somebody who's put out a prototype and you like their graphic design, maybe put a few hours into helping develop that game, and at some point casually ask who it is that they got to do the graphic design on it. There's loads. There's a wealth of information out there, and you don't have to be going out helping people with the intention of getting something back, but it's what the number of times I've sort of helped somebody playtest something, and then a couple of months later I've been like, just a minute, I have a question and I'm pretty sure they can answer it, and be able to go back and go, hi, you got a bunch of so there's a game called Pulp Detective, and they also did Pulp Adventure, and they had a set of sci-fi pulp book covers that I knew that they had gotten cheap from somewhere, basically the license to use. I happened to help out playtesting one of their games, and then like 3 or 4 months later, me and Mike were talking about doing this Perilous Tales, which is sort of a pulp 50s 60s set thing. So I was able to go back to them and say, oh, where exactly did you get those cheap classic pulp sci-fi covers from? And and they said, oh, it's this place. And you build these connections, and everything ends up being a resource. Everything ends up being something you can use for later. So and if you're not published yet, you've at least got hopefully the time to do that. And you should want to. It should be your community. It should be your hobby. It should be something where you're excited to go out and see what's bubbling under in the indie field. So pile into it. It's the number of people who sort of put together a Kickstarter or a game, and it's fairly obvious that they've never sort of interacted with the community on any level, is something that makes me perpetually sad, to be honest.
No, brilliant advice, and thank you very much for coming and speaking to me today. This has been brilliant.